If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that life can be completely unpredictable. When loss or tragedy strikes, how do we process our grief? To help us answer that and many other questions, joining me are grief recovery leaders Dwayne and Cindy Mullet. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cheryl. What a blessing to be with you all.
Well, I think this topic is so important. I'm so glad we're tackling it. And you know, you conduct these grief recovery seminars to help people heal and move on. And that really came out of some of your own loss and grief. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think about when I was in my teenage years, God called me specifically to invest in the least of these. And little did I know that God would take us down a journey where we would become one of the least of these. Cindy and I were married and began again traveling in ministry. And our firstborn, Austin, he was just 5 months old when he got sick and needed to go to the hospital. We learned that he wasn't going to live unless he received a heart transplant because of the enlarged heart that he had. And then several months later, he received a heart, and our second child was born. She was fine, no health issues. And Alicia was born then 2 years later, and she also had an enlarged heart. And so she needed to have a heart transplant. Following that, Austin developed his first kind of cancer, very aggressive cancer, 6 months of chemotherapy, not knowing what the future held for him. He came through that, cancer in remission, developed the second kind of cancer. And that was not sensitive to chemo or radiation. Surgery was the answer for that. And God brought healing there. Daughter Alicia had a lot of allergies and anaphylactic shock and just a lot of challenges she faced. Son Austin went to heart failure again as a teenager, had the second heart transplant, and then as a 16-year-old, due to complications of that transplant, he passed away. So there were many times along the way when we became one of the least of these, where the bottom dropped out, and we were searching for answers.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry for all you've been through and the loss of your son. I cannot imagine how dark some of those seasons have been for you. You're summing up a lot of years, obviously. But out of that, you really wanted to help other people process their grief. You've written a book on this called Pain to Purpose. And one of the things I really appreciated about it is that you talk about how grief looks different for everyone. So what are some of the normal things that we may feel different, maybe in different order at different times than other people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people, I like to say, when people face a loss like that, we're really at a crossroads in life. And there's so many different choices that people can make, with not processing the grief. And, people they become, addicted to things. They go to drugs and alcohol and just the anger and the bitterness that they feel can really hold them hostage. And so one of the things that we really like to try to help people to understand is that during that crossroads, it's important to have people around them, who can help them walk their journey. And, we look in the Bible, one of the first human crisis that humanity faced was aloneness, and how it's so important for each of us, no matter what grief we're experiencing, that we feel, people there, the body of Christ surrounding us during that time, and to help eliminate the aloneness.
And when you're talking about having someone with you, and I know that's a big part of what you advocate, you're not talking about just professional counsel. You're saying just an average everyday person walking with somebody in loss is really important.
You experience a loss, and then there is the numbness, which is God's anesthesia for us, and then there is the anger. Then there's the why God questions. And as we find answers to those why God questions, we need God's people. We have a debt of gratitude to God's people that have walked with us in so many ways. You need God's people to continue to process that. If you don't, it's like a festering infection that's in our soul that's going to destroy us.
Yeah, and you say that adds up over the years. So if you, as a child, didn't know how to deal with grief, and you've kind of gone through your whole life like that, how is that affecting us now, and then as we face new losses?
I think of the one lady that it was about a couple months after Austin passed away, and she came up to us at an event, and she said, I see that you all are still grieving. And she made the comment, she said, my mom passed away. She was like 5 or 6 years old. And she said the day after they buried her mom, her dad came down to the table where the children were sitting, and he said, Mom is gone. And from here on, I don't want you talking about her. It's in the past. And she said, from that day forward, I stopped crying. And so I haven't cried. And I saw how that she was always a very distant person. It was hard for people to get close to her. And I just saw the devastating effects of what that did, when you don't process your grief and your loss, how that can hinder you for so many years.
And part of that process is you talked about this anger at God. So I know, and I'm so thankful that you shared so honestly in your own book about your own feelings of betrayal, that you were praying for all those years for your son, Austin, and after all that you'd been through with him, you lost him. How do you work through those very natural feelings of like, God, I don't understand. Why did you take this person from me?
Right. Yes.
We need to ask those questions. We ask those hard questions. God, Joseph, when he was looking at his brothers, he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Each of us, we need to ask those hard questions, because God is a God of love. God is all good. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. One day God will eradicate all evil after he comes. And to get to know that God, that loves us, we have to ask those hard questions and process through, why do these things happen to me?
I love the book of Job, and towards the end, Job talks about, I've heard of you with the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. And just that concept of, in that storm, when God allows those things, sometimes what he's doing is such a greater thing. And he's changing our hearts, and he's changing, and just that we can get to know him through that process. We know that pain and loss was never part of God's plan, for humanity. But when we can allow the pain situations, any kind of loss, we can allow help us, to get to know who God really is. And I can just say for myself on my journey and our journey, I feel like I know God, and I know that God will carry me through no matter what we will face in the future. I'm convinced I don't have to live in fear, because I know God will be there. Yes, we will probably face some more difficult things, but his grace really will be there, and he'll be walking the journey with us.
And after going through so many tough things, that is saying something. Now, you talk about people who are walking along with someone, that you recommend that we do that. And you talked about how, when people say, just trust God, that wasn't really that helpful, even though you do need God. When people would say, oh, I'm sure good is going to come out of this, right away, that wasn't that helpful, even though you talk about God has a purpose in everything. So how do we, as people who are journeying along with somebody who is grieving, what are some of the do's and don'ts?
Mm-hmm.
You're good at that.
I would just say, when we talk about in the book about how people aren't suffering from a broken head, but they're suffering from a broken heart. And so being able, and sometimes, we don't know the right things to say. Sometimes it's just being there. It's crying with them. It's telling them, I'm so sorry. I'm hurting with you. My heart breaks for you. And sometimes it's those practical acts of kindness. But to be able for them to know that you truly care about them, and allow them to, talk about the anger that they're feeling, allow them to not be okay, and being able to walk with them is very, very important. And I think also just continuing to pointing them to Jesus, and to, just pointing us to Jesus and saying, what is Jesus feeling for you right now? How is his heart breaking for you as your heart is breaking? And we can do the best that we can to walk with people, but it is really truly the presence of Jesus that is a life-changing in those dark times.
Well, and if anyone would know that, that's you. I'm just thinking about people watching right now. I mean, I've heard it said that we're all in a grief process. The world is not the same as it was a few years ago. We've all lost something, even if it's the world as the way we knew it. What hope can you give people watching right now about how they can work through their grief in a healthy way, and that there might be a better tomorrow for all of us?
There is a better tomorrow. We can be overcomers. That's what we want. We don't want to be defined by the difficult things that we face. We want to be defined by the overcoming God that we serve. And as you continue to, I would just share with someone, as you continue to face the pain that's in your life. In our culture today, there is such a darkness, there's such a aloneness, there's such a separation, and you need God's people. And so being with God's people, allowing them to process what's in your heart, it's not, they need to know that confession is both accepted and expected by someone that is going through a loss. You're going to accept what they say. You're expecting them to be honest with you. And when someone faces that pain and they talk about it, they ask those wrestle with those hard questions, and then come to answers. We're convinced that God is good. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful. And as they do that, that process, it's an ongoing process, they will be overcomers.